Debbie Pepin. Welcome to another episode of That's Some Crazy Shit with Kelly and James. I am Kelly and my co-host is James. What's happening, buddy? What's going on?
You know how it is. I'm just looking at the mountains, enjoying our time together. Looking forward to another tantalizing guest.
Well,
right?
Tantalizing. It's a good word because our guest today, I don't know if I would say tantalizing, but it is some crazy shit. It's one thing that we all have in common. So James, What is the one thing that we all have in common, regardless of where you are in the world, regardless of your age, your race, your religion? What's the one thing we all have in common?
We're all gonna die.
We're all gonna die. Yeah. At some point in time, we're all gonna die. No one is immune from that. And so today's guest is talking about planning for death.
Yeah, it's funny because when we first talked about it, it was something that everyone's had to deal with, but when you don't think about it until you have to deal with it, you know? And when we talked about her coming on, I was like, oh, this is perfect. I wish someone would have told me this years ago.
And when we mean planning for death, we're talking about having your last wishes honored, having those things in writing, talking to your loved ones so that there's not fighting and stuff. And I think she's right. You know, and when we speak with Debbie, when we bring her on, she has a ton of information. Death is crazy shit because we don't like to talk about it, but it's something that we all have to face. And I know I'm guilty. I don't necessarily like to talk about it either. And I've dealt with it, and yeah, it's have lost both my parents and not having really either of their wishes in writing. I don't want to put my children through that. Right.
And, you know, I had similar experience, and, you know, since my mom passed away or since she died, I've kind of started to write things down, you know, so that my plans are known, you know, and it was hard to watch my mom plan her death.
Yeah, but it's something that has to be done, and it just makes things easier. So that is our guest. She has a wonderful website called deathtodolist.com. Are you ready to bring her on?
Let's do it.
Right. Welcome to our show. Welcome to our podcast. Death expert. I don't know if that's what she wants to be called, but that's the only thing I can think of. Deb, thank you so much for being on That's Some Crazy Shit with Kelly and James. We are excited to have you here. Welcome.
Well, welcome. Thanks. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thanks for being here.
You know, it's funny, you know, usually the stuff that we talk about, although can be serious, can go serious, lighthearted. And I think when, you know, with what you talk about, which is death, I think when we start to talk about death, it takes on a different tone, but it's something that we have to talk about, but most people aren't really comfortable talking about. So I'm interested in how you got on this journey to really, you know, kind of bring this to the forefront and make us step out of our comfort zones and talk about stuff that maybe makes us a little uncomfortable.
In 2017, I had 3 parents all die within 6 months of each other, and I was legally responsible for all of them, let alone ethically and morally. I think I did a pretty good job, but at the end of the day, it dawned on me that there were so many more ways that the end of life could have been approached, and it kind of gave me a new passion, and kind of as my give back to having had the opportunity to watch death 3 times so quickly was to say, how can I help other people deal with death? And I came up with the conclusion that how to deal with it is to talk about it. We are so not willing to discuss death in this country.
It is a very uncomfortable topic. And when we spoke earlier, I shared with you when my mother died of cancer, how lost we were. We didn't know, the arrangements to be made, paperwork, anything. And so I thought that was really important that we get you out there and have you get your message out.
Well, we're death denying. I think that's how I would describe the United States. We all know we're going to die, and that's good enough. We don't even really talk about illness. I mean, you kind of get permission from somebody to talk about a serious illness. It's not something that we just say, wow, did you know? And I believe strongly, based on research and based on discussing this with thousands of people now, that if we only would say, we're all going to die, it's the one thing we all have in common. So we talk about erectile dysfunction, we talk about hot flashes, we put all this stuff on primetime TV, but I've never seen anything that said, gee, did you know you should have a living will? Just something, that public service announcement. I'm working on a new series now, and I was just bringing up the term of living will, and someone said, well, I know where all my shit goes when I die. I'm like, that's not even what a living will is, and what do you care about where your shit goes when you die? Because you're dead. The truth is, when you're living a living will, don't you want to have your wishes in writing if you can't talk? I mean, here we have right now the condo crashing in Miami area. We've got a lot of deaths. Those people went to bed and didn't get up in the morning. Okay, simply said. One of the statistics I think is important to say is, do you know 2,600 people in America die completely unexpected every single day?
Wow.
Yeah, see, and that's the kind of response I get when I say that. And yet, that's a fact. It's just part of life. Only 75% of Americans live beyond age 65.
I did not realize how low that percentage was.
And as you know, some of those are infant deaths, some of those are accidents, some of those are suicides, some are illnesses. But nonetheless, at the end of the day, only 75% of us make it past age 65. Yet we don't want to talk about death, right? Because it's for old people. Well, I hope you're one of those, but that's only 75% of us make it. That's not great odds. If you're putting money on that, like you're talking about your mom, who must have been older than you, she had lived somewhat near an average life. The average age in America is going down. The average age in America of death is 80.1 actually. Men is only 79. Women is almost 82. But we're assuming we're all going to get there. Oh, well, I don't have to think about this till I hit the average age. And then you hit it and you say, well, that's not me. I'm better than that. I'm healthier than that. And so we push it and we push it and we push it. And you have the experience that you had about your mom, which is maybe your family didn't fight, but frequently when nothing has been written, there's no living will, people haven't gotten all their wishes put on paper, there ends up being fights, even court fights, where the medical team says, we want to keep him or her alive. And the family's one person saying, no, he wouldn't want to have lived like this. He'll never know who anybody is, or she'll be bedridden and she hated being bedridden. But if it hasn't been discussed, if it hasn't been written, if the primary doctor never heard this and you can't talk for yourself anymore, come on. I advocate that you need to at least get a living will, also known as an advance directive, done at the age of 18. That's the age of majority in this country. All of a sudden, you have certain rights, but you also have certain things that will happen to you. If we just would talk about death, it wouldn't be such a big deal. Instead of, oh my goodness, I never thought my kid's 18. If all of a sudden he goes hiking and falls off that cliff, which does happen, and no, I don't go through life scared about it. If anything, I'm like, live every single day, do crazy shit, do whatever you want, because life is short. We don't know. So are you living your life the best you can live it, which is all the things I decided after 2017 I needed to share with people, that we need to start talking about it, that if we can put erectile dysfunction ads on TV, we can sit with a person that we like and say, can we talk a little bit about your wishes? Because I'd like to know in case I'm ever asked.
Right.
What now I'm in my 50s. What would you suggest that I start doing or preparing a family member or friend to do in case of my death?
Well, I mean, in my opinion, and you can, in my website, there's other places where I list things that I think you should do. And I don't think you need to run to a lawyer. I don't think you need to spend money. There are great resources that are free or super cheap online these days that would help you get things in order. But you need, in my opinion, the most important thing, and I have a list on the back of my business card that I hand people as the takeaway. You have to have a living will. You have to. I care about that more than I care about the will, because somebody will figure out where your stuff is supposed to go. But a living will is if you couldn't talk. You're still alive, but you can't speak for yourself. Who out there knows what you want? Do you want to be kept alive at any price? Do you want to be kept alive if people are saying, we don't think he has a good chance, but there's a 10% chance he'll still make it. So we can put him through this and through that and spend $2 million and, all that kind of stuff. A living will should be written right away. And you want to ask me, where can you find the best living will template right now for cheap, for nothing, is go to AARP. And I know you may not be old enough to be an AARP. AARP and type in advanced directive. It takes you to a link for every single state. So it's different. The requirements are different in every state because that's how this country functions, right? But you go in and you put the state that you live in, and it will give you the form. It will tell you if you have to be notarized. It will tell you if you have to have a witness, but it will give you the template right then and there. So in that living will, you talk about how much medical intervention are you willing to cope with. And during COVID, and I don't want to get political at all, but during COVID, there was this huge outcry because people couldn't have people with them, and even today, that's still true, depending on the state and depending on the hospital. And so nobody knew where their living wills were. They didn't carry it with them, which would be a good idea. And I'm sure in the not too distant future, we'll have little chips in our arm that'll have our living will there if we bother to write one. But I think you absolutely have to have a living will more than anything else. I mean, I would go farther than that, and I have, but I'm always redoing it because whatever you write, you can change, especially if it was free and it was just going online and filling something out. But I mean, things like your care and feeding notes, what's your favorite food? What do you want? What do you want to make sure people, if you can't talk about all these things and people are trying to, you've got to have said those kinds of things. You also need a couple powers of attorney. I'm not talking about the kind of power of attorney, that because you're going in for an operation for a minute. I'm talking about a healthcare power of attorney. I'm talking about a financial power of attorney. And again, these are super easy forms. If people would just tell you, get them done. How about, have you written what do you want for funeral plans? I mean, my body goes to Texas A&M University. I know that's where I want it to go. And the forms have been completed and my primary doctor has a copy and Texas A&M has a copy. And in my wallet, it says, just take my body here, call this number, 1-800. So what else do I think you need to get done? There's something called a portable medical order, or POLST, and it talks about very specific things. We all think do not resuscitate, because we all see there's a DNR at the end of the hospital bed. Well, that's a piece of it. But having a POLST, a pulse, it's called a few different things in different states because the US isn't that organized yet, but it's a good idea to have that done. It's some facts that a doctor can check. Oh, they don't want that. Oh, they don't want that. The things I'm talking about in a living will, in an advance directive, are much more, they're not black and white. It's black and white to say, I don't want to have oxygen. I don't want to have a feeding tube. That's black and white. But when it's, well, I think recovery from this operation would be at least 5 years and they wouldn't be able to walk during that time. Well, you can't have 100 things on this form that says, okay, only an operation if I 1 year, so you need a person who can interpret those things for you. So there's the advance directive known as a living will. There's powers of attorney. There's the pulse, which is a medical form that's supposed to go with you, hence called portable medical term. Then there's power of attorney for about everything under the sun. And again, what you need to remember is none of this continues once you die. So you don't have to worry, oh, well, I know my sister is the calmest one in the family, so I made her power of attorney for my medical things, but I don't want her touching any of the rest of my shit later because she's got her own issues. And well, it all died. You can't have a power of attorney for someone who's dead. So I was power of attorney for my 3 parents, for example. The moment they died, no one was their attorney anymore, which is why you have to have an executor, which is why the courts get involved and assign an executor to take over, because you can't use the old power of attorney. A power of attorney, when someone says, but I'm the medical power of attorney, what they're really saying is she's alive, she just can't talk. So you go, no, but she's dead. If she's dead, you can't have a power of attorney. So again, people, I think, worry all this stuff. Oh, I'm giving away too much power and I'm doing this and I'm doing that. No, there really are protections to all those things. But again, one thing I would have you go do would be the advance directive and go to AARP and use the site. What do you want for your funeral? Have you thought about that? Do you want, 80% of Americans were cremated last year. We're really changing. Part of it has to do with the cost of funerals. Let's get real. How much do we want? Our connections to religion are less than they've been in researched history in America. So, thinking about what does end of life mean to you? Oh, I want a huge party. Oh, I don't want people wearing black. Oh, I want everyone sober and somber and, whatever I want to be turned into a piece of jewelry. I want my body burnt and I want somebody to wear it. There's all sorts of choices. You can be made into a tree these days.
I was gonna say.
There's all sorts of things. I have to share with you a funny story, by the way. When I was having lunch today at home here in Austin, Texas, a huge, what I thought was a butterfly came flying by, totally black. And by huge, I mean 6 to 7 inch wingspan. It turns out, having looked it up because that's what I do, it turns out it was a black witch moth. Very rare, only found from kind of very southern US down to Argentina. And it flew all around the table outdoors where my husband and I were eating. And then it eventually went up to the highest corner. And so I'm reading about it, and this is really interesting. I've never seen one of these. Well, they're really very nocturnal. It's odd for it to have been out during the day, and the adult only lives 3 to 4 weeks. Why am I telling this story now? Speak of crazy shit. People who believe in the magic of animals or critters coming by you say that if you have a black witch moth fly around you, it means something related to death is going to happen to you very soon. And I knew I was doing this podcast this afternoon.
That's crazy.
I got cold chills.
That's crazy.
Is that crazy shit?
That is some crazy shit.
And I actually took a picture. I said, I'll send it to those guys after, because I grabbed a telephoto lens and I'm like, wow. So.
Wow. And I firmly believe things happen for a reason. I really do. That
yes.
wasn't coincidence. Wow.
Agree.
Deb, when you were talking about all the things that you need to prepare, right, for, your advanced directives and all these other things, it's funny because somebody had asked me, I have guardianship over my son, who's an adult that has developmental delay. So I have guardianship. And somebody said, well, what happens when you die? And I was like, you know what? That is a good question.
Oh, yeah.
And I did find out that there is a form. There's a form
right.
for everything, right? There
right.
is a form that has to be filled out prior to my death. Or somebody has to go through all these hoops to gain
right.
guardianship. And he could be in limbo for a very long time.
Which is the last thing you want.
Which is the last thing I want. So I just thought it was incredibly interesting how, number one, there's a form for everything. But number two, it didn't even dawn on me until somebody brought it to my attention, because I just assumed everything was good, and it's not. And that's what we make assumptions that everything is good, or that people understand what you want, and it's not written down anywhere. And the last thing you want is fighting and bickering over what happens to
right
you, right?
And here's your son, who you've tried to make sure you take good care of, and you didn't know. No one said to you, and by the way, should something happen to you, or use that awful word, should you die, what would be wrong with that? I mean, there's so many examples like that. That's just like as soon as a person becomes a parent, an adult becomes a parent, you really need some sort of custodianship, guardianship paperwork done. And again, it doesn't have to cost anything. Get something written down. I have a niece and nephew who've tried forever to adopt. They adopted a child. They have no money. They have a huge heart. Right away, I was able to convince them, get that paperwork done. Should something horrific happen, you certainly don't want your kid to suffer and go to court and all those things. Now, let's downplay that. Do any of you have pets? Okay, you die because you're in that condo, because you take a hike and you take a bad step and down you go, because you happen to be in the car that gets hit by the semi-truck. There's 100 reasons. It doesn't have to be a long, prolonged death, and it certainly doesn't have to be at age 80. And who's going to take care of your pet? Who are you giving your pet to? I don't really care who I give my art to as much as I care about who I give my pet to. Exactly. Somebody who needs to be cared for. Right. And are you going to leave any money for that pet? Can the person who's going to, and you can't leave the pet money, by the way. Our courts don't allow you to leave money to a pet because pets don't spend it very well. They have trouble walking in the store and doing their shopping, So you got to give money to whoever you're giving it to, saying this is only for, Rover kind of thing. But so you think about pets, you think about your adult son, you think about your infant child. Well, let's carry that a little further. I have a friend who died just over a year ago. Yesterday, I got notice on Facebook, it was his birthday. And I'm like, he's dead. Well, he never filled out, there is a form on Facebook and other social media. It's very quick. And you can say, what happens when you die, to your page. But if you haven't filled that out, have you sent that notice to someone else? I mean, have you put in your final papers? Did you give anybody your passwords? Are they still trying to get into your phone? Do they know, how to do these different things? Our life is pretty complicated, but if we just write it all down somewhere, it gets a lot less complicated. Except You really could have been in that condo that collapsed. You went to bed and you never got up. And now look at the mess everybody's left with, unless you told someone near and dear to you, oh, my paperwork's here, or this is how to find it. And that's why I think the online memorial vaults are becoming big, because we don't want to have to deal with finding the paper. We just want to know, what website do I need to get into, and how do I get into it, and what's the password? There's a lot of ways to do it, but I'm happy to hear that you were able to get it fixed for your son. But that's a great example of what we don't know.
Yeah, and I wouldn't have known, I wouldn't have thought about it unless somebody would, because that somebody had just kind of mentioned it to me. I know that when I think of death, or before, I would only think of, most people, life insurance, right? All I need is life insurance. If I've got life insurance, I'm good. I don't need to worry about anything else. And I think, and that's what you see the commercials for, right?
Well, yeah.
And the life insurance that you see for the commercials is just to cover the burial.
Right. And so people are picking, I don't even want to get buried. I'd rather that money go to take care of Rover, than I would to bury me. Let's do a really cheap cremation. There's next to no costs here. And again, we're so upside down. Why don't we question life insurance? Why don't we question what we're being told we should do? And why don't we on our own figure out what's the proper paper trail? Paper can be electronic, to get these things taken care of. One of my favorite things to suggest to people, you asked the question, Jim, what should I be doing right now? And it's not because you're 50. It could be because you're 20.
Right.
I suggest on a regular basis, you and some friends, I like to do it New Year's Eve, but I'm crazy, is write your own obituary. Okay?
I've written my own eulogy.
Or a eulogy. The obituary, because somebody's got to show up for the eulogy. The obituary, they can read something. But the truth is, there's some good sites that show how to write a good eulogy, and there's some good sites that show how to write an appropriate obituary. And write your obituary today, like you were in that condo, and this is the end. This is the end today. And, I don't want to write it yet. I don't have grandkids. I don't want to write it yet. I still haven't taken the trip to Italy. I don't want to write it yet. I'm going to do more volunteering with XYZ organization. And I say, well, that was the whole point. Write an obituary because people have this belief that a legacy is leaving money. And, I don't have enough to worry about my legacy. Well, no. Legacy is, who are you? How are you going to be remembered? What are you leaving on this earth? And it's not about stuff. It can be stuff, and that's nice. You can leave some money to the zoo. How nice that you did that. But that's not the point. It's the legacy of who were you. Always upbeat, always willing to help people, always helping the next door neighbor, always volunteering at the soup kitchen, whatever it is. And then figure out, why aren't you doing it? I got a big bucket list. I got a big to-do list. But as soon as I get more time, as soon as I get more money, as soon as I retire, and I'm like, there are no guarantees. Let's figure out. So you can't go to Italy right now. We certainly can't go to Italy during COVID, but you could take some Italian lessons. You could take some Italian cooking lessons. Stop making yourself say, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And writing your obituary. And then the next process I suggest you do is make believe you're going to die at age 100. And write what your obituary will look like then. So you take what's your real life and what do you say is your perfect life, right? Because you're going to get all those years. And compare the two. And then start questioning yourself. Why am I not doing that? What's holding me back? What's my excuse? And that's a great way to enter a conversation about death with people, by the way. You know, you may say, how am I going to get my friends who are going to think I'm even more crazy than I am already to start talking about this? Well, I got a great exercise for you. Let's try this. Let's just plain see what it feels like. And then when you analyze it, you go, you know, you're right. There are a couple of things I could be doing now that I'm not doing. And I do have a lot of excuses. We all have a lot of excuses. And we live in America, which is incredibly death denying. That's my favorite way to put how Americans deal with death. We're death denying. We won't even say someone died. They passed, they moved on, they're not with us, you name it, but we can't say the word death. We can't say, I'm so sorry for the grief you must be going through because your mom died. We go, I'm so sorry to hear your mom passed. Where the heck did she pass to anyway? You know, what door is she behind? Why can't we be more forthright? Well, because we're death denying. I think we think if we talk about death, we're going to die. But as far as I know, if I tell you there's a thunderstorm coming, that doesn't mean that I'm going to get hit by lightning. You know, I mean, you know, I had a this black widow moth, witch moth show up, black. And one of the ways people have interpreted it over the centuries is that it's saying you're about to die. And yeah, if you want to always take that path, you're right. I thought, how cool. It came in to remind me I'm talking about death today. And it's kind of crazy because I've never seen a moth that looks like that, that's as huge as you. And then the funniest thing is, I was going to take more pictures. A wren came by and started pecking on the thing. Now, a wren's a third of the size of this moth. And so the moth turned around and said, get out of my face, and took off. So.
That is crazy. Deb, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and really bringing this to the forefront. I know that you had mentioned that you have a website. Please call out the website so that people can go to it. Death to Do List. All one word. death2dolist.com. Perfect. Thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. I mean, it's eye-opening, but it's a necessity. And then once you get it over with, it's kind of over, right? And you can go do other things, right? Well, you want to review it. You want to review it because things change. But I've got a new series coming out on YouTube, Death to Do List, and I'm hoping by doing it in 2-minute blocks using puppets that I might scare less people. So look to see more. When is that coming out? Do you have a date for that? Certainly by August 1st at the latest. Perfect. I can't wait to see it. So it's death2dolist.com. Is my website. Is the website, and Death to Do List, that's the tag for YouTube. Is my YouTube tag with some really cool puppets that have these conversations only in 2-minute snippets. Cool. Well, Deb, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks. I hope we all learned something, and we are all going to die. True enough.
You know what? That was, it was, I don't want to say enjoyable. It was very informative. And, that's good information. And it's something now that more I have to think about. I really need to get my, shit together because, like she said, you don't know. Yeah. And, it's something that I like the way how she said, she's not saying go dwell on it or whatever, right. But if you go get these things handled, and yeah, you do have to review them from time to time, but if you get them handled, then it's done in a way, and you can kind of
move on. I like the little trick she talked about, writing your obituary today, and then if you were to live to 100, and then go out and do those things that are on your bucket list. Why not? What are you waiting for? She's right. What are you waiting for?
Well, yeah. I mean, I know I'm not old, but I'm not getting any younger.
Yeah, but you're waiting for whatever. And I think she's right. I think a lot of us spend a lot of our lives worrying as opposed to just doing.
And what she's talking about is, once you do it, that's just one less thing you have to worry about.
Yeah, and the planning, it's people think it's morbid, but how it's inevitable.
Yeah.
That's one thing that we all have in common. It's the one thing that pretty much everything on the planet does.
Well, going to blow your mouth. Should we do random bullshit right now?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay, so now you're talking about everything dies. There are several animals. There's a couple I know that are in the ocean, and I don't know if you would call them animals, but there are several plants that they just regenerate and they never really die.
Interesting.
One's a jellyfish for sure, and I'm sorry I don't know the technical name for these things. I'm not an ocean biologist, but it technically never dies. And then when you think about, there are yeasts. People have had, how they do these sourdough breads. Some of these starters are literally hundreds of years old. And then also, I just read an article. The British they uncovered a ship that had sunk and had all these beer. And so they're opening the beer, and people are like, well, why are you opening the beer? You can't drink it. Well, there's yeasts that were in that beer that are extinct now. So they're going to use that beer to try and regenerate this yeast.
Bring back that yeast?
Yeah, that's extinct. So, let's speak. Yes, humans die, and we should prepare.
You're talking like plants and jellyfish. I was kind of talking like
they don't have to worry about AARP,
right? People and stuff. So it was, but thank you for the info because I did not know that. So
that was random.
And here's another random thing: the cicadas are gone. They should be gone pretty soon. I haven't seen one. I saw video of them. Ooh. Right? But I didn't see any. There were none that came and swarmed and attacked. I don't know where the cicadas were, but they weren't here. So
my sister's in Ohio and she sent me a picture of just one. Mm-hmm. God damn, they're ugly. They're scary.
They are scary looking and they're big. And then I had read an article about how grasshoppers were swarming on places in the Southwest because it's very, very hot.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And they were like going through crops. So that's all that I have. Because I didn't know that we were going to do this type of random bullshit, but that's what I read.
Hey, that's random. We were random, man.
That was random. So next week we have another guest, James. I just love it when the guests come on because they bring an element of the show that we obviously cannot bring. They have expertise or whatever. So next week, another guest. Our website is
thatsomecrazyshitpodcast.com.
And you can get all of our social media links, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. And you can listen to all past episodes, and you can check out James's blog. If you have an idea for James's blog, it's a great way to connect. You can get him at james@thatsomecrazyshitpodcast.com.
Yeah, send me some ideas. You guys, let's see what you got.
Yeah, absolutely. So James, I always enjoy our time together. It's fun. But I think we're pretty much done for this time.
So, with that being said, keep your minds open, people.